Hi and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you have been lingering in this tiny corner of YouTube, 500 strong at this moment. So anyway, this is my this is the video where I'll be sharing my thoughts on the books that I read for Group H BookTube Prize fiction category in Octofinals. So I read 6 books altogether. I have not read any of these books before this round, so it was like a very great, fresh experience for me. Great in the sense that it's fresh, but I must say, before I talk about all of these books, and before I talk about my rankings, I didn't particularly enjoy this group. So you might expect some rants in this video. But anyway, yeah, let's just talk about the first book. First book, which I put at number 6, the bottom of my list, and that would be The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. And I must say that I was really disappointed by the fact that I put this book at number 6, because this was actually a book that I thought I was going to love. When I first heard about this book being mentioned around on BookTube, I thought that it was really interesting. You know, this book was about it's about the romantic relationship between 2 enslaved young black men in antebellum American South. So I thought that was, that premise sounds so good. Already I could see so many layers, potential for stories from that premise alone. We have this historical fiction, we have the topics of sexual orientation, race, class, and already there were so many layers of intersectionality that could be explored in this story. And I was so excited that I got into this group, because this group has this book. I was so disappointed when I read it. A few chapters in, I was already quite frustrated, because I felt that this is a book that focuses so much on style that it sort of smothers the substance. Most of the sentences here are written in this very lyrical way. If you were to isolate any of those sentences and just sort of present them as an excerpt somewhere, I think most of us can agree that the sentences are very well written. It's very evocative, very beautiful, it's very poetic. But I think that is the main problem, I would say, in this book. The decision to make this book to be very stylized, or rather the decision to focus more on the style of this book, just sort of makes it sort of diminishes the impact that the story could have on me. And I ended up feeling that the story just sort of does not reach the level in which I expect it to be. It doesn't feel very profound to me, because I kept being distracted by the poetic sentences. And another effect that this had on the book is that it sort of turns most, if not all, of the characters into sounding almost the same. So most of the characters they ended up processing things, thinking about things, describing things in this almost similarly poetic manner, which is strange. I mean, that could certainly work if the book intentionally wants to be written in that form. If the author wants to write the book in that particular form, and maybe this was the intention of the writer. It's hard for me to say, but I feel that it simply does not reach that impact in which it sort of feels like a story that is being told through a particular form. It doesn't really like embrace that form really so much that it feels like, you know, the form itself is not particularly something that was used to convey the story, but rather the book is just sort of written in this like really over stylized manner that it just pretty much drowns out the story. So I think you know, that is my main issue with this book, and that is why I was so frustrated and quite disappointed with this book. I feel really sad about that. I am certainly going to read more of this author's work if he were to produce more novels in the future. I would be very interested, because I thought that the premise of this book was wonderful, but I don't know, the writing style simply did not work for me. So yeah, moving on to number 5. Okay, number 5 was also a book that I did not particularly like, and I think I would have DNF'd this book if it weren't for the BookTube prize, and that would be Sunjeev Sahota's China Room. I have many issues with this book. So this is a book about this woman who lived in the, I think in the first half of the 20th century in a village in the region of Punjab in India. So this woman is named Mehar. She's a young woman, and she finds herself in this matrimonial situation alongside 2 other young women, same age as hers, in which they are married to 3 brothers. These women are placed in a room, isolated in that room, that also has some china pieces also, and but basically what goes on is that these 3 women are married to these 3 brothers, but they don't know to whom they are married to. And so whenever they are to consummate their marriage, you know, engage in sexual relations at night, they do so in the dark. And they are also not allowed to see the man, which brother they are married to. So already we can see that this is a story, or at least we are led to believe that this is a story in which we are to root for Mehar, who finds herself in this really unpleasant situation, at least based on how we, the modern readers, you know, our modern sensibilities perceive it. And I imagine that even at that time, Mehar herself also, you know, wouldn't be pleased by this whole arrangement. And in fact, that is kind of like how Mehar is introduced in this book. She's not cool being married like this. So yeah, I think we are sort of we are expecting a story in which we want to see Mehar does something about her situation, and whether she triumphs or not, that's up to how the author wants to weave the story. But yeah, basically this is a story about in which you know, we want to see how Mehar takes control over her life and, you know, gets back her agency, and we are rooting for that. But instead, what we got in this book is, because Mehar is a curious person, she wants to find out with whom she is married to, which brother. That makes sense. But the story sort of takes a different direction, and we see how Mehar totally, because she mistakes that one of the brothers is actually her husband, the one she is tied to, she sort of falls in love with this man. She totally lusts over this man, and this brother, also sort of reciprocates her feeling. But this is not a spoiler. This man is not actually her husband, and because of that, because Mehar decides to do something about it, because so-called agency, tragedy ensues. So yeah, that's kind of like the storyline for Mehar in this book. There is also another storyline that is taking place in the 90s, in which we see a young man from the UK. His family came from the village where Mehar used to live, and so he goes to this village from the UK because he wants to wean himself off heroin. And in that village, he encounters some new people and has some, I don't know, soul-searching adventure. This second plotline is sort of nonsensical, I think. But anyway, about the Mehar storyline, I thought that it's okay for characters to lust over another character. I think that makes an interesting story. But if your novel sort of intends to introduce a character in which we are supposed to root for her trying to get back her power, trying to get back her life, through whatever she wants to do, how she wants to do it, I think that should be the direction of this book. Instead, we got a half-baked romance, sort of like a forbidden love kind of a story between a woman who is in a situation that she doesn't even enjoy, but suddenly she sort of forgets about that, and her story becomes focused on her infatuation, or rather her love towards this man. And I thought that that's the way that the woman, or rather the female characters in this book are written, Mehar especially, but also the other two wives, they are kind of badly written in this book. Somehow there is a bit of dissonance between how they perceive their situation and how we perceive their situation. If we were to sympathize with these characters have to at least show sufficient grievance over their own situation. But instead, there are also scenes in which we sort of see them kind of like casually talking to one another as if they're just living their life, like it's all normal. Maybe it is normal for some of them, maybe it's their culture, but we are being introduced to this protagonist and we are shown that she is not cool with it. So I don't know, there's a lot of dissonance in here. I think that the female characters are badly written in here. I think the ending of For Mehar is really lousy. So this book was... I did not like this book. Moving on to number 4. That was a long rant. Number 4, it would be Nadifa Mohamed's The Fortune Men. I was actually intrigued by this book because this book is about... It's sort of based on a true event. So it's about a man who lives in the 1950s UK, a Somali man named Mahmoud Matan, who is being wrongly convicted of murdering a Jewish woman. So this book is sort of like the dramatization of what happens before the murder, during the murder, and also what happens after the murder. So we see the stories involving Mahmoud himself, his life, his family. We also see stories of the murder victim, whose name is actually changed in this book, by the way. And also her family, her life before the murder, and also what happens to Mahmoud and basically his family after the murder. So already I think we can sort of expect, because we sort of know, or rather we are expected to know what actually happens at the end. I think this book's intention is to flesh out the characters, such as the main guy Mahmoud Matan into a full-fledged human, and just to sort of shows a different perspective on the kinds of life that he lives in 1950s UK. And this is a book that explores topics such as racism, immigration, intolerance, various kinds of intolerance and discrimination. So I thought that premise itself is quite promising. But I also found that this book to be quite... It is a bit too long. so to speak. There are a lot of extraneous detail that is being attached into this book, aside from the life and the family of Mahmoud, and also the murder victim, whose name is Violet in this book. There are also other things included in this book which sort of gives us the context of the culture of various minorities at that time, but I feel that they are sort of shoehorned into this book, and it doesn't feel really organic. What I feel is that it was, it's as if I am reading, or rather I'm watching a documentary of the life of the various minorities, especially those from Somaliland, because Mahmoud himself is from Somaliland, and various kinds of minorities at that time in the UK, and there are snippets of dramatizations, reenactments here and there, and also the dialogues between the characters. They just sound kind of stilted. It doesn't sound organic, and it feels fabricated. I mean, essentially, this is an interpretive work. I don't think that the author really knows what Mahmoud, for example, is talking at that time with his friends. The exact things that they say. So I think most of it is interpretive. But I feel that even if it's interpretive, it has to feel real. And for some reason, and I can't really put it into words, why exactly, but it just doesn't feel real. It feels fabricated, it feels artificial. The dialogues that the characters have with each other feels kind of fake. So, and I couldn't shake off that feeling. I didn't particularly enjoy this book because overall the writing just feels sort of off here and there. But I do appreciate the fact that, and it's also quite obvious that there is some passion in this book. You can totally see the writer's intention to inject more humanities into everyone involved, especially the main protagonist, Mahmoud. And there is a lot of humanities injected in here, but I feel that overall the execution is just, the writing style is probably doesn't gel with me. So yeah, that's my main issue with it. So I put it at number 4. Moving on to number 3 is also a book that I would say I didn't particularly enjoy. So that sort of, now you can sort of imagine how I feel about this entire group. Number 3 is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So this is probably the longest book in this whole group. This is a book that has multiple timelines. So first timeline is taking place in the 15th century, I think, around the time of the invasion of Constantinople, and residing within the walls of Constantinople is a young girl named Anna, and outside the wall is a boy named Omer, and Omer has been conscripted to join the army force to invade Constantinople. And eventually the path of Omer and Anna, their paths will cross. So the second timeline occurs sometime in the 20th century, I think, in Idaho, in which we see an old man named Zeno, and he's rehearsing this particular play about a story, and this story is actually called Cloud Cuckoo Land, and we'll see later that this is a story that sort of connects all of the timelines, all of the storylines in this book together. So Zeno is rehearsing a play called Cloud Cuckoo Land with a bunch of kids in a library, but in that library there is a bomb set by a young man. So in the third timeline, we see, which is taking place sometime in the future, which is sort of a sci-fi future, we see a young woman named Constance, who is living in a spaceship. And so all of their stories are sort of connected together on how these stories involve a particular story called Cloud Cuckoo Land, written by some author. I forgot what the author's name was. Loading. Okay, I just figured out. The original writer of the fictional story of Cloud Cuckoo Land is called Antonius Diogenes. And so basically this Cloud Cuckoo Land is an ancient story, and all three timelines in this book are sort of connected with each other through a common thread, and that is this particular story. And so what happens is that in this book, we sort of, for me, it feels like a collection of vignettes across different time periods, across different eras, so to speak, and how these vignettes sort of have their own self-contained story, but they're also kind of connected by a common thing. And I thought, my first impression while I was reading this book is that it felt like it was designed for a TV series, like a limited TV series. And I also thought that this book was just a little bit too long. It was just too spread out. But I just want to say that the writing in this book is quite nice. And I think that many reviewers also agree with that. It is quite beautifully written. Individual sentences, if you were to extract them out, they would look nice, and I would certainly agree with that. They are nicely written, very descriptive. But because they are descriptive, very descriptive, that is also the reason why this book is really long, because it's all about descriptions of scenes, of characters, of what is happening at a particular time and place. And I thought that it was really dragging. So as a result, I didn't particularly enjoy it. Just didn't work with me. Okay, so number 2 would be a book that I think is quite well loved, and that would be The Promise by Damon Galgut. I would say I sort of like this book. I think it's quite interesting, and it has it certainly has an interesting writing style, which I sort of have some conflicted feelings about. So first of all, this book is about the story of this family who is living in South Africa in the 20th century. Around the time of when the apartheid is still quite active, quite a thing in the society, and this family is living in this house called Lombard Place. And in the beginning of this book, in the first chapter, we see how the matriarch of this family, her name is Rachel. So Rachel is dying. Basically, she's dead in the first chapter, and so her family has some kind of issues with how they want to deal with her funeral and stuff, because Rachel just sort of reconverted into her Jewish faith. And so there is a little bit of tiny conflicts within the family about how they want to deal with her funeral. But the main thing that also happens around this time is that the youngest daughter of this family, named Amor, she overhears a conversation that's taking place between Rachel and also Rachel's husband Manny about what to do with Lombard Place. And basically Rachel wants Lombard Place to be given to their maid named Salome. Basically just have the house given to Salome. But even after Rachel's death, this promise that Manny made with Rachel doesn't really precipitate into something that is real. And this is the thing that persists throughout this entire book. Basically, the promise in which the family wants to give this house to the black maid, Salome. And this is a story that explores a lot about the society and also the politics of South Africa at the time. But in the simplest way, it's about a family's reluctance to sort of give some kind of their so-called privilege to the black member of the society in Africa at the time, which is in this book, the maid Salome. I find that this whole entire premise to be kind of interesting. The way that the chapters in this book, they are broken into 4 long chapters, is also quite interesting. And I'm not going to talk about what happens in these 4 chapters, but there is some kind of repetition in all 4 chapters that I find to be kind of nice, almost fairy tale, almost folk tale-ish. This kind of repetition there. So there is a little bit of that literary device being used in here, which I think is quite interesting. I don't want to say what it is because you'll just gonna have to discover it yourself. What I find to be somewhat difficult for me to read was how this book, it is narrated in this omniscient third-person narrator, and but the way that this third-person narrator takes us into the story, it feels as if we are riding on a fly, on a fly, the insect, the fly, and the fly just sort of lands on different characters for a short time, and then it will go to a different character and stay there for a short time, and then go to a different character and stay there for a short time, and so we don't really get to stay with one particular character for a very short time. Basically, our point of view, our focus in this story just constantly shifts to different characters really quickly, and sometimes there's not even a signal that we are going to shift to a different character. All the while reading this book in third person narration, but we kept on shifting between different characters, and it's kind of distracting. But yeah, I think that's the only issue that I have with this book. It's just, I don't know, I don't really like that. I don't really enjoy feeling as if, feeling dizzy while reading a book. Just, yeah. But overall, I think this is a nice book. So yeah, finally a nice book. Book at number 2. So finally, book number 1, of course, I think everyone would know by now what that is. That would be How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue. So this is a sort of like, I would say, a sprawling family/domestic fiction that is taking place in a fictional African country. So we have this family living in a village called Kosawa, and what happens there is that there is a American oil company who comes there with the intention of harvesting the oil under the ground of Kosawa. So when that happens, basically the entire operation sort of introduces tons of pollution to the grounds and the waters of Kosawa, causing many inhabitants of Kosawa, like the children, the elderly, to get sick and even die. So when the villagers in Kosawa realizes that, why exactly their people are dying, they start to take action into their hands, and their action starts out fairly peacefully, but eventually, because of how that peaceful action does not yield some results, their attempt to negotiate, to peacefully deal with the American company about their circumstances, it eventually becomes more and more violence. And it is through this setting that we get to see the story of one particular family that is very strongly affected by this whole conflict. This family in this village. So central to this family is a young woman named Tula. So we start to see Tula in this story as a young girl, and she eventually grows up. As the story progresses, Tula would eventually studies overseas, and she comes back as an educated woman. And with her education, she supports the villagers' fight against the American oil company. So yeah, this is a book that is that speaks a lot, that explores a lot about colonization. It explores a lot about environmentalism. It explores a lot about the issues of indigenous people. Stuff like the adverse effects of extreme capitalism. It is a book that has plenty of message, and by the time I finished this book, I realized that while it feels like a long and almost epic family fiction, it also reads like a parable of sorts. And I guess the first sign of how it is actually a parable is actually through the fact that this place is taking, this story is taking place in a fictional country. So yeah, there is already that sort of like parable element to it. But the way that this book ends also does not exactly provide anything fresh for me, which I think is kind of a bit of a disappointment, I guess. But overall, I think the entire work, the way that this novel is constructed, I think is quite well written. Because even though it's a parable, even though it's somewhat of a parable, usually what I don't like in a parable is how the characters, especially the side characters, are not fleshed out. But this book is a long parable. And the reason why it's long is because it is taking the time to flesh out many of the characters in this book. Not only the main character Tula, but also Tula's family and her friends and her neighbors. Many people feel very real in this book. So this is a strange case in which a parable-like story, but the characters feel like real people. So yeah, that's an interesting combination. I sort of appreciate that. So and also the way that the characters are written are not, their struggles, their lives are not romanticized. They feel like actual people, and you feel like the writing is also quite atmospheric, so you feel like you're actually there also. So yeah, quite strong writing, although I do think that the story doesn't really provide anything particularly fresh. If you're the kind of a person who is a little bit cynical, I guess, maybe you'll find the ending of this story to be somewhat of a okay, that's it kind of a moment. But yeah, I think this is a good book. So yeah, my number one for Group H. So that's it for all of my comments for the books in this group. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to judge the second round or not. We'll see. And I'm also quite excited to see how the results is going to be like, because I'm recording this video before I see the results. So by the time this video is out, the results is already out. Wait, did I say? By the time this video is out, the results is already out. Okay, I was afraid that I might say something wrong just now. So I'll see you again in a different video. Let me know what you think about any of these books, if you have read any of them, if you have some thoughts about these books as well. I feel like I have many strong feelings about many of these books, particularly, you know, ranty feelings. But yeah, maybe you like those books, and tell me, what did you like about those books? I am so interested to know. Maybe you dislike the books that I like. I would also want to know your experience with these books. Or maybe you just want to read these books. You have not read these books. I would definitely recommend most of these books. Most. So yeah, I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.